Mr. Derek Veenhoff. He's better known as Deek.
Drinking liquor with DJ Deek, we out laughing.
Yo, Deek.
Okay, check. DJ Deekatello here again, guys. Episode 71. I'm here with the Fitzgerald co-chairs of the Fitzgerald Neighbours group, Suzanne and Caleb.
Yeah.
And welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We've been trying to plan this for like a while, a couple months or so. We finally got here. So the Fitzgerald group. Why don't we actually start with? Yeah, I'll just sort of explain. The Fitzgerald group. It's a community group.
Neighborhood association.
Neighborhood association. Okay, that's the technical title. And why don't you explain to us what it is?
Yeah, we can do that.
Broad strokes, maybe, to start.
So, we're a neighborhood association, as you say, technical term. So we're a group of neighbors that have come together, and our main kind of idea to start was just to get to know our neighbors. So in kind of today's society, so to speak, there's few and far between opportunities for us to get to know our neighbors in a natural situation, right? So service clubs, religious organizations, opportunities for people just to kind of rub shoulders outside of the workplace. There's not a lot of those opportunities to do that. And so a neighborhood association is something that we kind of had gotten to know, and Caleb can give some of the background of where kind of he was inspired by. But an opportunity for people just to get to know each other, be neighbors, build relationship, have an opportunity to know what's going on in their neighborhood and what's going on in their community. And be able to have a collective voice and be able to kind of engage in the narrative as to kind of who we are, what our neighborhood's about, and what we can do as neighbors to really make our neighborhood the best that it can be.
Now, should we maybe explain to St. Catherine's listeners the boundaries and what is the Fitzgerald neighborhood?
Yeah, sure.
It's remind me which streets.
Fitzgerald's kind of like Midtown, so it's Lake, Welland, Carlton, and then it's kind of like a pizza slice. It goes all the way out to past Niagara. Mm-hmm. So there's a little community past Niagara. We kind of, as a group, like that's kind of large for a neighbor association. I kind of say that neighbor associations are as far as you can walk. Mm-hmm. So at first we were just Lake, Geneva, Welland, Carlton. There's a little block there with kind of a collegiate in the middle. Yeah. We had some neighbors though on the other side of Geneva wanting to join, and I always kind of said, like you're free to come out to meetings. I just can't walk that far. But if there's enough interest, enough neighbors over there, then for sure we can service that area. Like it's just a matter of having neighbors to help hand out flyers and So it kind of has extended all the way. It's to Niagara
grown.
Now.
Yeah.
But that was the original thing.
So you guys actually set the boundaries of it when you created it. Is that true, or was it an existing sort of neighborhood?
Yeah. Well, I went on Wikipedia, and so there aren't a lot of like. There was a Wikipedia page about neighborhoods in St. Catherine's. Yeah. And basically it's like the North End. It's an entire neighborhood, which isn't true, but that's kind of what the map was telling me. Yeah. And then I had a few smaller ones closer to downtown, and this was just one that was there, so I just kind of used it.
When we talk to people are always like, how did you come up with the name Fitzgerald? And it just was like, well, Wikipedia told us actually. Yeah. And so it often... the kind of larger neighborhood is Shipman's has been kind of named, and that's both Fitzgerald as well as the Hague neighborhood. So again, as Caleb said, just for the sake of being able to remain kind of a community and a neighborhood, like Shipman is just way too big, right? Mm-hmm. And so, so we're really excited. Hague Neighbours has kind of started another.
There's others too. There's a few others. Mm-hmm. Queenston,
Ryderville, Queenston. Ryderville is by Diner House 29. Right behind that area. It's smaller. It's a pretty small neighborhood. And then Port Dalhousie has a beautification committee, which is similar to a neighbor association. Mm-hmm. Walker's Creek is a kind of a historical group of neighbors who do work around Walker's Creek. And then Port Weller, they have a newsletter.
Okay.
Yeah, they're an interesting group. But
Glenridge.
Glenridge, right? Old
Glenridge as well. Yates neighborhood.
Yeah.
They have a form of a neighborhood association.
Right. Are a lot of them have formed more recently? Or like is it sort of a snowball effect that's taken a
bit? Like I think the more historic neighborhoods, neighborhood associations, they're doing something a little bit different than we are, but similar,
Yep.
right? Like,
Yeah, there has been quite a few that have started over the last.
Yeah.
So we, our first kind of event was back in 2017, 2017 or 2016,
yeah, I can't remember. Been a while.
and so since that, like within the last 3 years, there have been a number that have started.
Yeah, Queenston,
since that.
Riderville, Hague. Those are all three newer ones.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's also Woodruff.
Woodruff Estates. They
Yeah.
started as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so let's maybe what is so there's a treasury where you raise money and you use that to fund different initiatives in the neighborhood. Like we've got an ice rink thing going on. Is that's still
Yeah,
Yeah.
thing?
that's
Alright,
happening.
cool. You do these trivia nights and there's merch and stuff like that. So the garage sale, and some of them are more so not even sanctioned things, but whoever is sort of a member and wants to come up with something, right? Like
Yeah,
the
we
Run
did,
Club
like-
started like that.
Yeah, there's a running club. Sometimes I do a porch party and sing along.
Yeah.
So we project words of songs on the side of our neighbor's house
cool,
and just
yeah.
kind of party on the street. It's
Yeah.
fun.
So one of our neighbors did a plant swap
Yeah.
this fall, so that was great. So our rule, so to speak, has been if you have an idea, just run with it.
Yeah, all ideas are
And
welcome. For
all
sure.
ideas are welcome, and
Yeah.
so it doesn't need to be a Fitz Neighbors event, but we'll promote it. We'll use that as a platform to be able to share that and to kind of spread the word and kind of continue to gain traction with that. And so we have no desire to be kind of have to own everything by any means. And that's part of it, right? Is that we want people to be able to have that creativity, come up with cool ideas and do things for their neighborhood because they really just want to and they're inspired to do so, right?
Now, at what point does it become sort of activism or political, and how is that a component of it? Because a lot of it's just fun events and meeting your neighbors, but then there are also issues that we have in the community that we want to raise to our local representatives. Do the representatives see the neighborhood groups and sort of interact with them at that level?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot recently, just dealing with different neighborhood associations who think of it a little bit differently than I do. I think we've taken very few kind of political stands as a group. The one that we did kind of engage more intentionally with was the portables in the park. We can talk about the park later, but in terms of being political, I don't see the role of neighbor associations so much as representing neighbors. I think that's our counselor's job. So that's Carrie and Matt. I see more the neighbor association as reflecting the neighbors, and we can do that. We do that in two ways. The one way is we provide a platform for the counselors and the city to understand the neighborhood better through our resident group, right? So at each event that we have, we always try to kind of connect the event with either a survey or engaging neighbors on topics that are of interest to them, but also an interest to the city. So how do we share the park, for example, with the school? How do we encourage people to use this park space more? Because we're paying for upkeep, so why don't we find a way to bring more people into the park? So the ice rink is one of those examples. So that's the one way that it's more political than it looks on the surface. The other way is kind of the flip side of that, where I think you as residents, we vote for a counselor, right? And that's one way we act politically. But a lot of work happens between elections, right? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of missed opportunity often for residents to be involved in that work. And one of the reasons why we miss that opportunity is because residents aren't educated, they're not engaged. It's very difficult, I think, for a city that's maybe strapped for cash, or counselors who have a giant ward to deal with to continually be engaged with residents, right? Often it's only the residents that complain that they hear from.
Exactly.
So I really hope that we can kind of also be a platform not only for the city to hear from the residents, but also from residents to learn about what the city is doing from city employees, but and our counselors. So Carrie's been out, Matt's been out. Carrie, in the last meeting, she shared why she voted a certain way on something that came before council. And so that was really great because we were able to understand her thought process. We understand the issue a little bit better. The issue was the tax rebate that
In Port Dalhousie.
in Port Dalhousie for that cotton mill.
Actually, would you want to expand on that a bit? I don't know a lot about it, but is that could you give us the cliff notes of that?
I only know about it from what Carrie shared at our meeting.
Okay.
I do like
Because I know it's a contentious thing, and
It
is.
it's an interesting debate as to how that's all going down. But
yeah. If we have anything like that in the Fitz, then we'll obviously be more engaged.
yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure.
More interested.
We'll know all the details around it and such. Yeah.
But yeah, like for anyone who's interested in something contentious like that, it's great to come out to a neighborhood meeting because you have access to a counselor then, and you can ask them, and they're the ones that know. Like it's their job to know, right? So
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense to have a sort of grassroots group of people, and it's not like a closed club. Like it's the opposite. Like everybody.
Absolutely.
Well, if you're in the confines of the neighborhood, more or less.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is our role as a neighborhood association is because we are bringing neighbors together. There's an opportunity for that engagement, and we want to be a resource for the city, for our councillors to be able to engage with our neighbors and with the residents in a really in a non-confrontational way.
No
The city,
pitchforks.
yeah, and the city also too. Public
Proactive,
meetings
more than reactive,
public meetings are difficult for this. For city, and St. Catharines is no different. There's not a lot of uptake from if the city was to hold a public meeting about an issue. So I think about so on Ratzlaff we have a new condos that are almost kind of getting completed.
Yeah.
It's been a long process. But I remember we had just began as a neighborhood association. Or it was actually just Caleb and I. We were meeting in our living rooms, and there was a public meeting at City Hall around that condo, and about an opportunity for residents to voice their concerns or their thoughts or what have you. And I went to this meeting, and there was there's 3 of us that were there.
Oh, really?
At this meeting, and it was a pretty contentious issue too. It's a brand new kind of a condo.
Pretty tall,
Pretty
is this the one
tall.
high
behind me
density.
here?
Yeah.
So I'm their neighbor.
Absolutely, yeah.
I hear them working all the time. Well,
Yeah.
sometimes.
And so there was and there were neighbors there that lived on Kernahan, that lived on the neighboring
Russell,
streets,
yeah.
and they were expressing their concern. But it was just, as Caleb said, those who were complaining were there. I came to listen, to be able to understand. I didn't know the issue too well, and I think it just was to me it kind of was one example of how. Okay, there's better ways and other ways that we can be engaging the community on issues, and not that we as an association are taking a stand on it, but providing a platform for neighbors to share, for the city to be able to engage with us, for opinions to be heard that are both positive and possibly challenging, and for us to be able to kind of give that opportunity. And we want, again, through the surveying that we've been doing, and through, again, just even those what appear to be just social events, it's an opportunity for people to actually, to share those ideas, to share those opinions. And it's always amazing to me of how, these different topics come up in just informal conversation.
Exactly.
And that's an opportunity for people to kind of share that, right?
Council meetings, like I've been to a few now, like they're pretty inaccessible, right? Like they happen twice a month over dinner time. I think 6:00. And sometimes they can go like forever, and you can show up, and the issue that you want to hear council talk about gets pushed back because you have to talk about something that's happening in Port Lucie, and you have like a ton of delegates. So the great thing about a neighborhood association is we all hold something in common, right? Even though we can be very different. Like you can be a Trumper, right?
Yeah. Not really Trumper, guys. Just find him funny, sort of.
And then you can have a socialist and a Marxist, but like they live all in the same neighborhood, so they hold something in common, and there's reason for them to come in dialogue, right? And so, I mean, that's it is something that we always have to be aware of and work on. But I think that like the neighborhood association can be a place that's more accessible for a greater number of people, depending on their their age, their race, their
socioeconomic status.
Yeah. And so it's just, and that's what we try to do with our events too. Like we try to plan events that kind of are attractive to all the different, all the diversity that we have in this neighborhood, which I think is a strength for sure. Yeah.
It does seem like the perfect sort of thing to hammer out ideas that we're like minded on, or filter ideas through, so that when they do go to the councillors, you can just have those 2 or 3 very important ones rather than a bunch of people raising their hands.
And even
smaller things.
Yeah, and even for the people who complain, like you'd be amazed at how fast those people will stop complaining when they hear from someone different than themselves. Like, so if you're like me and able body, and it's I don't know what the issue would be. when you hear from someone who's retired or someone who's elderly, you hear about their challenges and how they engage in the neighborhood. You're like, oh, okay, it makes sense that the city needs to be designed that way because you have these needs that I don't even see them, right? I don't even think about them, and so it's great when you get in a room, the people who are complaining will often be confronted with people who are different than them and realize that maybe what they're complaining about isn't that big of a deal after all, or maybe that it's a good thing that's there, like, yeah.
Can I dive into each of your maybe like backgrounds and how they led you to this path, or like what strengths you bring to the table, kind of thing? Caleb, do you want to start? Or
sure, yeah. I have 3 kids, so that's something that affects how I think about things. I was amazed when for our first, I was the primary caregiver. So I was just amazed at how that kind of changed how I thought about the world. Like just pushing a stroller down the street, it's like, oh, wow, there's some challenges I did not think about. My education, I was educated. I have a degree in political science and a master's degree in political and social philosophy. And
did you go to Brock for that, or
no,
abroad?
No, I went. I studied in Toronto, and I work at a church.
Cool.
Yeah, do pastoral work at a church.
Cool.
Downtown.
So they're all sort of community-related things already, so that just kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about you?
Yeah. I also have 2 children, and they also have informed my view on life, absolutely. Professionally, I've been in community development work for the past decade. So I have a degree in sociology and then a postgrad in public relations. And from that, I dove right into the not-for-profit sector. So that's always been kind of my passion, to be within that sector, and so I was able to, right out of college, actually was able to get a job doing community development here locally in St. Catharines, and so that was really, I didn't actually have a ton of experience doing community development in an official capacity. I had always been kind of a volunteer and had kind of engaged in that kind of world, but now to be a paid professional doing community development was a new thing for me a decade ago. But it really just ignited a passion for me as to how do we engage community, how do we start to look at community in a different way. And through that experience, I was kind of exposed to what's called asset-based community development. So I don't need to get too technical about what that is, but it really has informed my way of approaching community, where we look at what are some of the strengths of a community, what are the things that make this community strong, and how do we use those strengths and those assets to address the opportunities. So it's not turning a blind eye to the challenges within a community, but being able to kind of flip it, as opposed to going from a reactive, complaint-based kind of approach
looking
to
at all
community
the negatives,
development.
or just these things are bad. And
How do we start to kind of say, okay, what are the things that are really awesome about this community?
focus on
What are the
those.
assets of this community? Who are the people in this community, and what do they bring to the table? And how do we utilize those assets to really be able to address some of those opportunities and those challenges? So yeah, a decade ago, that's kind of what I was first kind of exposed to, and that really has set kind of the course for me as just in a way to approach really life in general, as to being able to look at how can we come from a place of strength. And so my career kind of navigated in various different ways and various different organizations, and has taken the idea of community development, or the professional role of community development, has kind of shifted and evolved over time. Yeah. And right now I work for the Niagara Community Foundation. So we're a philanthropic organization that is kind of the charities of charities. So we are one of the funders within Niagara, and I do community development in kind of, a different kind of twist to community development within that work.
And I should say, Suzanne and I worked together to start Queenston Neighbours in the Queenston neighborhood.
Yeah.
So
So that originally started, again, within kind of the hat that I was wearing at the time, and it was part of my role, my job, to kind of be able to do some of that community activism and facilitation, really, to bring different community stakeholders together around community. And so, I roped Caleb in right away, as he was working within Queenston and had kind of a good pulse as to what was happening in the neighborhood. And I was like, okay, you need to be in on this. And so then, he was able to we were able to kind of bring that initial table together. And so that happened kind of actually, shortly after we had started the Fitz. Queenston
and that's
took
kind of
off.
that's how Brandon came into the picture too.
Mm-hmm.
So Brandon Agnew, who is going to be joining us tonight, but he's at home.
He can be on the
recovering.
next one, perhaps. Brandon, shout out.
Yeah, he works for public health, and he came on board with Queenston Neighbours at some point.
Yeah, same type of thing. I was looking for various different people to help, and his name was suggested, and I pulled him in.
Yeah, the cool thing about I think his position at the region is that a lot of municipalities are recognizing that social connectedness actually contributes a lot to the health and well-being of communities and people in those communities.
Makes sense.
And it actually is like you can actually put a dollar figure on it, so it makes sense to hire. The region right now I think has three positions that type of position that Brandon's in, and primarily Brandon anyways works in creating like social capital within regional housing communities. But Queenston was, and different neighborhoods, I think. Queenston was one of the neighborhoods that, he kind of got the thumbs up to work in and with us. So, financially it makes sense, I think, to create, neighborhood associations or create opportunities for people to connect socially. So it deals with, mental health, social isolation, and not that everything has to be about money, but you can save money because people are healthier when they know one another.
Well, I guess, in a way, everything is about money, and it's not just a bad thing. I mean, like a healthy, economically running city or state or country is healthy. It's it's good for people to have a healthy economy. Speaking of specific issues, what are some of the glaring issues in our area or in the city abroad, like what that these groups or people that are involved in the groups can sort of directly get involved in the conversation? Like, what would you say are the ones that pop up the most?
I've been amazed at how different they are and how many different issues each community, even though they're so small, the neighborhoods, they all seem to have their own things that their own challenges and their own assets that they're dealing with. Like Fitzgerald actually is one community that has, I would say, way more assets than things that are challenges for sure.
What would be an example of an asset, maybe?
We're very diverse in terms of age, I think. So we have lots of young families. So Fitzgerald was a community that prices stayed relatively low over the last few years when prices in St. Catharines were skyrocketing. Yeah. But it was also a community where you had a lot of retirees. So I moved it here about 5 years ago, and my street, we were the only family with young kids. And by the time we just moved around the corner, but by the time we made that move, half the homes were young families. I think it's really healthy for a neighborhood to have young people and old people, and have them be able to interact and have the community be able to support them. And the reason the Fitz is able to do that is because it's very walkable. Yeah. There's the high school, there's the elementary school. You can walk to downtown, you can walk to the grocery store, and other communities like Queenston doesn't have that. Yeah, in Queenston, you have a high concentration of social services. You don't have a bank, you don't have a hospital.
Right.
You have the Connaught School, which is great. That's a huge asset in that community. But so they're missing some of those assets, and they're missing some of the things that we're lucky enough to have here. Yeah.
It's just a problem that I have, but I always think of every issue like a video game. So it just makes me think of those Sim Cities.
Totally.
That's kind of what it is.
The hospital that's coming down right now,
Yeah, for sure.
They're recovering from that too, right? Their story is each neighborhood's story is actually really complex and interesting.
Yeah.
I kind of actually it reminds me of Brock Street in Port Dalhousie. I don't know if you know the street. I lived there when I was a little kid. And my dad was a volunteer firefighter at that fire hall, and then my uncle lived in the apartment building, and the babysitter lived across the street, and there's a library there. I would go 2 doors down and get a book and go home.
And we walked to the library all the time.
It was like a mini neighborhood.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's like those mats that you play with the Hot Wheels cars on. Yeah. It has everything at the school, the church. But that's a good point that a lot of neighborhoods are a little more isolated or off the beaten path or whatever. Due to different reasons, right? Like city planning or history or the way the roads are because of the creeks or whatever. There's probably so many reasons why these different problems arise.
Yeah, or the old rail trails like we have here. We have the Terry Fox Trail. It used to be a railroad, and I know in the north end they have that really great path that runs like almost from the south to the north. That's used to be a rail.
Like the dirt path thing?
Yeah, I don't know what it's called, but
yeah, like, kind of like with those little creeks.
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, there's that Walker's Creek, but I don't know. There's another. It goes beside Holy Cross, and
Not familiar.
yeah, anyways.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I know that one.
I've gotten
that
lost
was
in that trail a few
That was an
times.
old
I
railroad.
think so, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
No, I know that one. Interesting.
Yeah, so the people definitely, I would say, are our greatest asset, and I think this goes
Yeah.
for really any neighborhood, are the people in the community. And so the diversity that Caleb was speaking of is really, really a big piece of that. And the neighborhood shifted. It has shifted in the last 5 years, like you were saying, like with the influx of new families and younger families coming in. But also people from various different parts of the region, from Toronto,
right.
have come into the
Right.
neighborhood as well. So that brings kind of a new perspective, new energy as well.
Yeah,
And
new ideas. Like,
new
I've been amazed
you know?
at the.
Yeah. So lots of people have, they've come. We got a message on Instagram from a person from Toronto saying, "I found out about you guys, and I am really involved in my neighborhood association here in Toronto. I was looking for something when I'm moving into St. Catharines, and I was looking for something that I could get plugged in with, where like I want to live in the Fitz because I've heard about you guys.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And she's like, tell me about their neighborhood. I want to know about the schools. I want to know about this, and I want to be involved when I get here. And it just, to me, it just is like, first of all, I was totally amazed that she found us, but it also spoke to, again, that's new energy, but also experience that, she's coming with from being engaged in these different communities and these different neighborhoods. We just got a new volunteer who seems to be super keen, Jesse. Hi, Jesse. Shout out to Jesse. And he's coming from Fort Erie, and he and his partner moved to the Fitz and has just like, again, he has this new perspective on the community, on what makes the neighborhood great, and I really value that. And I think that diversity of perspective and life experience is really what makes this community really strong, and what gives it some really great momentum and potential in moving forward. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, you ask about challenges. Like, there's a challenge in what Sue said as well, and that challenge is gentrification.
Yeah.
So
That's
I mean,
huge.
since we've been here, housing prices have gone crazy in this neighborhood as well, and I think that's going to be a challenge moving forward. Just how do you a friend of mine said this about her neighborhood in Hamilton, but like, I don't want to do all this work just so someone a lot wealthier than my family can benefit. Right? Like, I want my neighborhood to be a neighborhood where my kids can purchase a home in, or at least rent a home in the future, right? And like, housing in Hamilton anyway has gone up $70,000 every single year for the last 5 years, and that's I can't even imagine like my kids being able to rent or buy if that happens here in Fitzgerald. So yeah, I think like, I hope that we can explore that issue as neighbors.
Yeah.
First, understand why this is happening, and then begin to look at other neighborhoods across Ontario and how they've dealt with it, and then be able to import some of those solutions here. We can talk about. There's a few that have come across the group. There's a few things that I don't know. A few things we're working on right now.
I had a question about that actually.
Yeah.
Would you say that like this podcast is for really dumb questions? Everybody, sometimes I have to ask them because I feel like you get the best answers when you ask dumb questions. Is the rising prices of housing in general a different issue from affordable housing? Like, do they have? Is there a different connotation there, or would you say that just you know what I'm trying to say, like the
There's
general...
a lot of connectedness between the two, I would say, for sure. Because as the market prices rise up, then the affordability just naturally becomes less, right? So houses, one of the things that we noticed, and again, that opportunity or that asset that I was talking about is also definitely a huge challenge. We had a big influx of Toronto buyers coming in. And they're buying really affordable houses and either flipping them.
Well, I mean, the housing in Toronto is crazy, right? So like, when they see the prices here,
Yeah,
like, my wife works in Toronto, and when she tells them what we bought our house for, they're like, "That's crazy! I'd pay twice that for what you have." Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, especially if they're selling a house in Toronto and moving
For
here,
sure.
it's like, yeah, we can spend, twice what the houses are going for.
So the houses, so it's the change of market, right? Because then what is kind of easier for a first time, Fitzgerald used to be a really easily accessible neighborhood for first-time home buyers, right? Yeah. So they were wanting to get into the market. They were able to buy something that was, decent, but was still affordable. And think that that's starting to shift slowly, where it's becoming less so because the values of houses have gone up.
For sure.
So what's happening then is that then those first-time home buyers aren't able to afford to purchase homes,
Yeah.
and so they're looking. So then they're renting, but the rent prices now are also increasing simultaneously,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because people are realizing that the demand is so huge that they're able to increase those rent
For sure,
prices,
for sure.
In
Yeah.
significant ways. So then that puts a huge strain on the rental market. And so now we're at, full capacity for rentals. And so then we don't have that affordable housing piece.
Right.
And so that's definitely a shift. And it is a conversation, because the other thing that's been happening, and this is not unique to the Fitzgerald neighborhood at all, but also to just in regards to the demand for rental units, there's also, and this is a whole contentious issue, but in regards to kind of Airbnbs, and
I just did the survey.
yeah,
The survey?
There's a survey. There's a St. Catherine's
Right.
survey on
right. So there's kind of the I don't know what the generic term is for those types of rentals.
Temporary rental?
Short-term
Yeah,
rentals.
short-term.
Short-term rentals. It's becoming a really big thing,
Oh, yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so we're seeing a number of them pop up in our community,
Mm-hmm.
and in our neighborhood, and they're awesome. They're
Yeah.
cool. They're hip. They're they're trendy. They look awesome, and they are providing an income source for these homeowners, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And so, but it's not an easy conversation, right? Because then what were rental units now are becoming these short-term rental
Right.
situations.
Right. It's a new
And so that can
Yeah.
it can really put, again, another kind of strain on a really difficult situation.
Yeah, and some of the things that kind of have come across in conversations at the group, and in regards to how to address affordable housing from a neighborhood association perspective.
Well, sorry, folks. Technical difficulties. We're all good. Go on.
Yeah, so the one is like just taking a look at some of the policies that the city has that can inadvertently limit. Not infill, but just kind of like people making apartments in their place. So one of the things is if you don't have enough a parking spot for every unit in your building, then you can't have a legal unit,
Right.
right?
Well, 'cause
So like
they would be taking parking from
on the street,
homeowners that could otherwise use that.
right? I mean, with
Or-
their rental, they're renting a place, so that they have equal right
Right.
to that rental spot just as much as a homeowner would, right? So. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know the justification for it. I think actually it has more to do with, people not liking the look of cars parked in front lawns, like in the north end, because that's what would happen is you kind of pave over your front grass and you just add parking in front of your house, and that's not allowed
Right.
either,
Oh,
right?
okay. Yeah.
So if you have parking, if you can get a variance from the city and you can put parking in front of your house, but parking actually has to be beside your house if you want parking on your property. And so just interesting little things
Little
like that you
adjustments
can
that might
adjust
need to
to
happen. Yeah.
encourage
Right.
like basement apartments or encourage a duplex, encourage density in Midtown. And our neighborhood, like the thing that I hope we can work on in the future is just educating neighbors on why our neighborhood is a great place for higher density. And it's because of a lot of our assets. It's because you can walk. It's because you don't need 2 or 3 cars because, like someone can stay home with the kids and you can walk and get groceries.
Right.
Or, it's even for people who have accessibility issues, right? That's why I think it's great for kids and the elderly here because they can walk and they don't need to always have a driver's license and be able to be independent still, live independently in Fitzgerald. Yeah, so I think, and one of the other things I was thinking of when Sue was talking is land trusts. So in Hamilton, there was a neighborhood association that created a land trust. So basically, they're kind of a group that whenever there's land that comes up in their neighborhood or in the area which they work, they're able to kind of apply to the city and try to take even a small chunk and make it affordable housing. So there's a lot of like small pieces of land in our neighborhood, but Queenston especially, that's kind of doing nothing for the city. So it's not bringing in any taxes. It's just kind of sitting there idle. And like, why not find a way to put affordable housing on that? And that's kind of what the land trust works on.
So this would be like we just had this with the building downtown where they're going to turn that into affordable housing.
That's right.
So what it would be is a government-owned facility.
No, so the land trust, I would actually own it. It's a not-for-profit, and so the government would basically say, okay, like this is the not-for-profit, this is what they do. Like they'll I guess fundraise, and they work with the government to get the land for very cheap, right? But so they're able to put.
So the rent goes to that, or how does the rent?
I,
Who
There's
takes
various
the
different
rent check?
models.
Yeah, there's different
models
models.
of how they would
Okay,
do that.
yeah.
Yeah, but
Do you know with the one downtown how that's one's supposed to work, or that details?
I don't
are
know,
not
actually.
I'm not
ironed
too
out
sure.
yet?
I don't think it's gone out for tender actually even to purchase yet.
Oh, okay.
It's just been they've just
gonna
designated
turn this
that
into-
as to what
Yeah, it says if,
what
yeah,
that will
if
need
they,
to be.
if they do sell it, it has to
Yeah,
be
so
low
when it's
income.
sold, it needs to be sold for this purpose.
Yeah.
So yeah, that will be a specific model, and there's many different models. But just the idea that in regards to the neighborhood association is being able to advocate on behalf of the neighborhood of saying how do we remain accessible in a variety of different ways,
Right.
and one being housing affordability.
Yeah.
And so how do we make sure that again that our neighborhood remains diverse in regards to those who live here?
Right.
And so we do see that rental properties and affordable housing is an asset to our community, and that diversity is an important way to maintain the health of our community. And so is there land that we can advocate for, and again, the model's isn't developed specifically here, but as to that we can advocate saying, can this be designated for affordable housing? Can we ensure that there is a percentage of our housing in our community that remains affordable? And so that kind of that infill and that high density that's coming into our community we're engaged in that conversation. And so even going back to that initial that example that I gave about Ratzlaff and the condos there, right? So we weren't engaged in that conversation. The neighborhood didn't engage per se in that decision making process at all. And so if we have another situation like that where they're taking houses down and wanting to do that kind of more infill kind of situation, can we engage in that conversation and saying, okay, we are all for that infill. We think that's
But could
great.
it be more affordable?
But what is going to go in there? What kind of housing is going to go in there? And can we make sure that that equation, so to speak, of our looking at that full picture of our community is keeping it into consideration, right?
And you almost have to get the ball rolling even before that stage.
That's right.
Where you have to think about like how in the past have we encouraged, say, co-ops to exist, right? Like there's a lot of co-ops in St. Catharines, but they were all built early 90s or before, right? And they're actually all coming up. They're going to need renovations. They're going to need a ton of investment to keep running, and we need more, right? So how do we create policy where we encourage, instead of someone coming in and building high-end condos, which is fine,
Right.
but like how do we create the policy where it's attractive to someone, a co-op group, a group of residents who are passionate about this neighborhood and want to see it remain affordable? How do we make it appealing for them to go and do a project like this, like a co-op
Right.
housing situation, right? Because I think that would be super neat in this neighborhood. I think it'd be awesome.
Yeah.
And there are groups like the church's Lutheran Manor, right? They have kind of affordable housing for seniors there, or senior housing,
Okay.
and they would have built that a number of years ago. But how do we encourage them to continue building, right? Or the Anglican Church, I know there's interest in them building affordable housing. So how do we say, like, first educate neighbors? Say, hey neighbors, like, this is probably a good idea. Like, there's lots of reasons why you might want this, so they get on board. And then how do we get the government to create policy where it's like, you should do this, and like, here's how you can make
why.
here's how we can
Economically
make it
viable or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Because I want my kids to live here.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And I think going off of that, and going back to kind of what is the role of a neighborhood association, and the model that we have adopted, and what some of the newer neighborhood associations that have come since in the last couple of years has been that we want to be more proactive than reactive. So we haven't come around a specific cause, right? Something that's really contentious in our neighborhood that we have that was our rallying cry to bring us together. That's never been kind of what has unified us at all. And the idea with that, or it's intentional in that we want to be able to build a foundation of community and relationship, so that we can create plans, be more of take a proactive approach to what is for the health of our community.
What do we want to see? What do we want our vision? What do we want the community to look like in 5-10 years?
Yeah.
Like, do we want to have super expensive homes, or do we want to have homes that are affordable for everybody?
Yeah, and you start that work early, so
That's
that you
right.
can sort of
So that if you haven't kind of done that groundwork, obviously there's lots of neighborhood groups who have come together around a really contentious issue, and it brings it builds momentum, and there's
you can work with that,
and you can work with that absolutely. But then when the issue is gone and the issue is done, then it can be hard for that neighborhood group to continue, right? To
Right.
continue to say, okay, now what's next? What's the next, big, bad, ugly thing that we want to tackle?
For sure.
But instead, so we're kind of taking that, we have taken that, a different approach of being able to say, we want to be prepared and we want to be able to have a bit of a foundation so that when that thing comes or when that issue arises, that we already kind of have worked on building some of that relationship.
An example of that is Catherine Street Park.
Mm-hmm.
So like the history of that park, the area where there's a soccer field and the school uses the soccer field, that used to be, that and the dog park, I think used to be industrial. And so
I used to run through those factory fields when when they fenced it all off, but then they let it all overgrow. We would play in those fields.
Oh, really?
They called them the DDT field.
There you go.
Whatever. And we were like, maybe we shouldn't have been running through that
Yeah,
field
no,
because
maybe
there was
not.
barrels of stuff and whatnot. And
But when it came down, right, you actually had a few different instances where you had neighbors come together and say, hey, we want to keep this a green space. And so how do you do that? Like, they had to actually cap it, right, with clay. And they had to do that twice, I think.
because there's stuff under there. but
Yeah.
it's deep down.
Yeah.
So they didn't remediate it, I don't think. They just capped it. I'm not exactly
I don't
sure
know
how it
that,
works.
yeah.
But
It looks a heck of a lot better than it used to look.
yeah. But you can't build housing on it. Like, you couldn't
Right.
build residential housing on it, but you
Okay.
can have a park there. Yeah, I just think that, like, it's a little bit of a missed opportunity, because it would have been great if those groups had kind of stuck around and continued to do work in the neighborhood, because, that history would have been really beneficial for our group and for when the schools, the DSBN, kind of rejigged how it operates in this neighborhood. It would have been great if that group could have given the history of those parks and said, this is how hard we've worked on this to keep it green space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that would have really added to the conversation, I think, about how it's being used currently. And this is something that we've heard from neighbors, that my kids go to Harriet Tubman, and it's great. It's a nice big school. The staff there is fantastic. The principal there is amazing. And but the one struggle is, how do we use that park space? So when they built the school, they were nice enough to keep the school in the middle of the neighborhood rather than move it outside of the neighborhood. And part of the reason they were able to do that was because the park, Catherine Street Park, was 70% of it was given to the school for their playground. Leased. Yeah, right, not given to it. So it's still city property, but it's leased by the DSBN. And so how do we share? The question becomes, how do we share that property well with the DSBN? And the struggle is that it's not being shared well. So right now there's about like a 6-foot chain link fence that goes around. You've seen it, right? That goes around like 70% of the property.
Right.
I think there's a lot of opportunity to share that better, because what happened with that fence now is you kind of have, it almost feels like a little jail yards, right? Like you have the front of the park, and you have then you have the playground, and then between the dog park and the playground, there's an open space where there's actually a community garden going in there. So a group of neighbors who we kind of connected with, they're actually going to, through the city, they're actually going to put a community park there. So it just is going to make more and more sense, I think, as we move forward, to find a way that space can be shared better. Yeah. And even the connectivity between St. Patrick's Park and Catherine Street Park can be made, can be improved, right? Like there's no crosswalk there, there's no paths that go through it. The school itself is experiencing congestion at certain points, and I think if we thought about the design of that park, it would be beneficial for everyone involved.
Yeah.
So that's one of the projects I'm hoping to work on in 2020 with all the stakeholders. So people who are in the dog park, the new community garden folks who that garden's going to go in, our ice rinks in St. Patrick's Park, the community center that's there. We're hoping that with the feedback we've already gained and the feedback that we're going to continue to collect, that we're able to begin envisioning how we can use that space better. Yeah. One of the things we know for sure that we need is shade in the park, by the water park. Right. And we've had conversations with Qantas, and they've been really keen on working with us to invest in that park. So we didn't want to do it piecemeal. We want to have kind of a vision, say, hey, this is what we want it to look like in 10 years. So, if Qantas wants to invest now, we can do this project, but this project's going to tie in, right? Like we don't want to just do like here, 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 and here. It doesn't really make any sense, right?
Pre-plan and kind of make it all.
Yeah, like the plan doesn't have to be like set in stone, but it does have to be like, hey, okay, we want this park. Yeah, like even if it's as simple as saying we want this park not just to be for kids, we think it's actually healthier if the park serves young parents, kids, and the elderly.
For sure.
Right? Because it brings them all together in the same
And
spot.
like you mentioned, this neighborhood is a mix of those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people view parks in St. Catharines as for kids. And I think that's terrible. I think that's a terrible way
That's
to.
a good point. That's a very good point.
I lived in Germany for a while, and like there was like not a lot of kids in the park, but it was packed with people.
Yeah.
Because they were designed for people, not just kids.
Humans like green spaces.
Yeah, exactly.
Humans like green
Exactly.
spaces.
Yeah, so that's an issue. I'm really pumped to work on this year, and I
Yeah.
think that there's tons of potential. And yeah, I think it's really cool. Like we're already going to get the ice rink in there in December. We're going to get that community garden in for sure. I want to get some pawpaw trees in there, and then I do want to think about how we can share that soccer field with the DSBN
A little bit
better.
better. Yeah.
Very cool. Amidst all these topics, I wanted to jump back a bit to affordable housing. I feel like affordable housing and homelessness and mental health and addiction are these big issues that people kind of get confused in their minds, or they think one affects the other directly, and maybe it's a little more indirect. And because what we have a lot lately in the last 5, 6, 7 years is more visible homeless, mentally ill, drug addiction on the street. We know these anecdotal reports or photos we have of needles, discarded needles and such. And these are these things that really trigger people and get to their emotional reactions. And I feel like a lot of people think that if you just make things more affordable, then all the homeless people will just be able to afford houses. They will no longer be homeless. But and I know this is a big issue in California. I don't know exactly how it relates to around here, but it must be somewhat similar. There's two competing ideas. Well, like the one is that affordable. If you make things more affordable, this will solve the problem. But if you go and on the streets and talk to these people and see what's really going on, I think in California, a new study came out that's like 85% of homeless are intravenous drug users. Something crazy like
Huge.
that. So that's obviously an issue. And what are the biggest things that are coming along to tackle drug addiction? I mean, we have the safe injection sites,
Yeah.
Niagara, and stuff like that. But there's also like just general mental health. Isn't that a huge problem that we don't have all the resources for in this city? There's these. And how are those things related? Is that's a lot to throw at you guys, but like, how does that sit in your mind?
Yeah, for me, like they're all really interconnected. Yeah. There's a program called Housing First right now. Works, I think it struggles. It's struggle because you have to find marketplace rentals, and there's no marketplace rentals available. But the philosophy behind it is, if you don't have housing, it's going to be hard to deal with your mental health issues. A lot of people who struggle with mental health self-medicate with drugs, right? We had this panel at Westview Christian Fellowship on the consumption and treatment site, and when I was doing interviews for that panel, so I was just looking for people who have experience using drugs, experience using the site to come on the panel and share, right? Because I think that their voice is the most important voice because they're the ones that know. And the biggest thing that kept coming up over and over again was like when you're on the street, you can't get off drugs because you're on the street. Like you're constantly coping, and your coping mechanism already is drugs, and it just doesn't work. For sure. Like it's a chaotic life. There's no regularity. There's no routine, and yeah. So if you provide someone house first, there's the opportunity and the ability to get off drugs is far easier, right? There's a lot of people who take drugs who can afford it, and they have a regular schedule. They know when they're getting their drugs, and they can maintain that lifestyle for a long time because they have a house and because they have the money to pay for their drugs, right? Whereas if you're addicted to drugs, you're struggling with mental health, you don't know when you're going to get your next fix. You're desperate. You're going to do some crazy stuff that you wouldn't do otherwise. So I think it's crazy that we live in this such a wealthy society like Canada, and we can't afford to give people like just the bare necessities like a roof over their head.
Right.
So like that's the philosophy behind Housing First. You give someone a house, and then you deal with the issues that are associated with living outside every day.
Right. I guess it's one of those things where it's. And we mentioned my friend Taylor, who's been on this show a couple times. Shout out Taylor, who me and him have these conversations all the time. And he works in the field of HIV, and it's there's so many variables that are going on. It's
Yeah.
it's not a black and white issue.
It's
by
not a
any
straight
means.
line. No.
There's so many different things that we talked about trauma just before we started recording. There's diet. There's so many different things, and it's very interesting. The reactions and the solutions that people seem to have, and the sort of almost anger, because I guess people they see intravenous drug use as just like insane. Like people can understand having a drink or but there's these levels to it that get so crazy. And then with the discarded needles, people are worried about kids getting pricked in the parks, which
Sure.
of course is a worry. But I don't think studies have shown that safe injection sites cause more. I think that's just the drug use is on the rise, and that people
Overall.
litter, and all humans, just regular people litter their.
Yeah.
So also, if you're using and you're high, I mean, there could be some
The
sort
thing
of,
we've learned at the Queenston Roundtable, so we have the consumption and treatment site with Positive Living. They come out to every meeting, and we've walked with them through their journey to open their permanent site. The first thing that we learned is like they hand out needles, but their recovery rate's 85%. So of all the needles they hand out, the users are actually very concerned about recovering those needles. The other thing we saw in the neighborhood was once the site opened up, there was less needles in the park, because every person that you can get to use inside the site, that's one less needle that there's a chance that it ends up in the park or in a public space, right?
Yeah.
One of the struggles with overdose prevention sites is that people who are using drugs aren't interested in traveling long distance to use that drug. Like when you get the drug, you use it. You don't think, okay, let's get on a bus, take like half an hour ride because I'm in Niagara Falls, and the only consumption site in Niagara is in Queenston, right? That's not going to happen. They're in a perfect location because if you look on a map in terms of the amount of overdoses in Niagara, that's where the most overdoses happen. But I do think that like we could use an overdose prevention site in Fitzgerald. I think that would reduce the amount of needles in our park. And that would, like, I don't think it's fair that Queenston is the only neighborhood with one, because like one of the reasons why you have a concentration of overdoses in that neighborhood, it's a storied history. But I think one really easy way to tell the story is we didn't want to deal with it, so we pushed them all into one neighborhood.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, like people probably didn't plan it out,
For sure.
but that's what happened.
Yeah.
Right? When downtown's revitalization plan, you don't want to see people using drugs downtown, right? That's not going to attract business. Right. So like you push them away. Where do they go? They go to Queenston, right? And I kind of think that's totally unfair. And I think that the other neighborhoods need to pick up the slack. And I think that there are people in Fitzgerald who would lives would be saved.
Yeah.
I was in the park this summer, and a gentleman overdosed, and like if you ever see someone overdose, like they're dead, and then they come back to life, right? When the naloxone kick comes, and so I think like first, like the overdose prevention site in Queenston has saved over 200 lives since it opened in January, and I think it would save lives in Fitzgerald as well.
Just for people who don't know, harm reduction is for saving lives. It's not. Its primary goal is not to stop people from using. Although that can sometimes happen because they get more access to medical professionals
Services,
and whatnot. But what would you say to someone that sees on social media now, a picture of a couple needles in the park and then someone says, well, yeah, that's because of the safe injection sites. Like, what is it? Do you just show them the studies? What would your argument be to that?
Well, I mean, obviously it's not because of the safe injection site, because if they would have used a safe injection site, the needle wouldn't be there, right?
So it's someone that's not using. It's not that 15%.
It's actually like I would say to them, it's actually the needles there because there aren't enough safe injection sites.
Right.
That just shows the needle in the park shows that there needs to be another one in this area.
And I guess to reverse engineer their brain, you could say, I mean, there's a lot of more social media now than there was. There's probably
Exposure of it. Yeah.
exposure. There's probably. I'm sort of just guessing, but I'm pretty sure drug use is just generally on the rise. So maybe.
Well, they're different drugs too. So like when we talk to friends who I know who've worked in the field, like even 10 years ago, it was a lot of like the homeless population were a lot of alcoholics. Like the alcohol was kind of the drug of choice, and they were an older crowd. Now it's a younger crowd of people, and they're using opioids. And like this is a dangerous drug. It's not like it used to be. Like
and
this
it's
is
not
something you
just
can.
Niagara, although we do have a huge problem.
Oh no,
with it,
it's not just Niagara.
Oh no.
And
North
it's
America, but it's also global. You talk about fentanyl, China, and all that.
Yeah, and it's these drugs being mixed in with other drugs, right? Like,
Yeah.
And you can die really quickly on this stuff. Like, it's not like, yeah, it's different.
Yeah,
it's dangerous. It's
very
different.
dangerous,
It's a younger population of users, and it's sad. Like,
Yeah.
there's no reason why all of these young kids need to be self-medicating with drugs. Like, there's no reason why we can't create the conditions where, in our society, where they can find other ways to deal with whatever they're dealing with, whether it's trauma or mental health or. We heard from a woman at the panel that I hosted who said, you know, her and her sister were raised in the same family. They experienced the same trauma. She decided to deal with that trauma with work, and her sister decided to deal with the trauma with drugs, and her sister's not with us anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, they just chose different drugs. Mm-hmm. One was more deadly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sad.
It is sad, yeah. And, it's obviously a multi-pronged issue, a multi-pronged approach to solving these kind of things, but they're definitely interconnected.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, housing, safe injection sites, more support for people struggling with mental health.
And just a note to the people who would say they're fiscally conservative or they there's too many of these services and whatnot. You got to think about preemptive solutions that down the line save you money.
Mm-hmm.
As if you want the economy to be austere or whatnot, there's certain things that if you invest, now they'll be cheaper down the road or stopping HIV spread. And
dealing with mental health and addiction, though, I think is less expensive than dealing with a lot of things that are created by enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's expensive to deal with problems that come up because of kids were playing on contaminated fields,
right.
because the only thing that people can purchase are food loaded with sugar and are unhealthy for you. Like that's expensive too. Smoking's expensive. Alcohol is crazy expensive. Even if you're not an alcoholic, like the amount of money we pour into healthcare that's associated with stuff that's just dealing with the effects of alcohol, right? Like. I think
the
that
cost in our healthcare system is massive.
Yeah.
Like that drug users are stigmatized the way that they are is unfortunate and wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I've heard that about the United States system, healthcare system too. That like there's a lot of over testing. There's a lot of overburden on the system from people just with general ailments that they could solve by exercise, diet, and simple things.
Yeah.
So complex issue, but little somber, but. Switching gears, what's next for the Fitz? What events are coming up that if anyone's around the neighborhood they can
there's lots
check
of events
out?
coming up.
The Fitzmas coming up.
We have Fitzmas coming up. Merry Fitzmas.
Ice rink's going in.
Yeah, we have the ice rink coming in. So yeah, the Fitzmas party is just a holiday social we have at the Imperial Vets Legion. I don't know if it's
It's both. It's Legion and it's
Imperial Vets is upstairs with the Legion.
Yeah.
And so that's coming up. That's exciting. We have the ice rink happening, so that's going to be happening in St. Patrick's Park. We're really, really pumped about that. We've been advocating with the city for a few years to make that happen. So that's really going to be awesome.
Fingers crossed for weather. Like I'm a little bit worried that if we get like 3 or 4 skates on it this year, I will be like overjoyed
for sure.
We have there's really cool story associated with it though. We had I've been working to get. Fitzgerald has been working to get an ice rink in there for 3 years, and then when the city created this pilot project, which is great, I can't praise them enough for that. There were 2 people who applied, me and someone else, and I'm like, who the heck is applying in this park? I've been trying to do this for 3 years. What are you? I was like, kind of like, man, you're on my turf. Back off. But it turns out she's like super nice. She said like her father passed away the last year, and he used to create an ice rink in Kernahan Park. Which is a public space, interesting. I could argue with the city that, this has been going on for years. Why is it such a problem now? And she's
won't
like,
get into that.
she's got a cottage where they have this easy ice, whole ice rink contraption system.
Oh, okay.
And she's like, I'm just going to bring it from my cottage because we don't use it anymore and we can put it in the park. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Done.
It's like the plastic, it's like $1,000 system, right?
Yeah.
So
we've partnered with her.
Cool.
and we're gonna get this.
It's gonna be.
up and
Oh
going.
yeah, it's gonna be a question of how we get water on the rink. So if there are neighbors who live close to St. Patrick's Park, I want to talk to you.
If you're
Yeah,
listening,
if you're listening,
Let's get some
live,
water
yeah,
on the
live
rights.
along Terry Fox Trail. Let's talk.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so
and
that's
if-
happening, which is gonna be great. And then also, yeah, so 2020 we're doing some of the park planning. We're gonna be doing some public art, some murals
Oh,
are
yeah,
gonna
that'd
be
be
happening in the Fitz, where we're really really excited about that. So that's happening in some private properties, potentially some public properties.
And we're
We'll see.
celebrating a new business in the Fitz.
Yeah, new business is starting up. A new restaurant is opening on Russell Ave, so that's exciting. And the other thing that we'll just put a shout out, I don't know if this is going to go out in time, for the Better Cities Film
Right.
Festival that's happening. That's happening this weekend on Saturday. And
Get your
that
tickets.
we're really, really, it just shows to me, and it speaks to the change of culture within St. Catharines, within Niagara, an appetite for this. So it's a film festival focusing on how do we make better neighborhoods, how do we make strong neighborhoods, and kind of highlighting some really cool initiatives happening across Canada, I think. And I don't
all
know,
over
the
the
films
place.
are from all over the place.
Yeah. So there's like a series of short films that are just people sharing kind of the different project that they've done in their
For sure.
neighborhood
Yeah.
to improve it.
So shout out
Sweet.
to Kaylin. She is one of our
She works
all-star
for-
volunteers.
She
and
works for Better Neighbors.
Better Neighbours.
Okay.
And so she's kind of the champion behind this film festival. So we're really excited for that. So that's coming up.
Community Garden. So they're.
Community Garden is happening in 2020.
I think we've
and-
gotten approval from the city to put it in.
Sure.
I can't
Just
remember.
put it
I can't remember where
in.
it's going, but
Yeah.
it sounds like it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
like I can say with confidence that it's probably gonna happen. It's gonna be right beside the dog park.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many plots they're gonna start with, but they're hoping to have some fruit trees there as well to celebrate, Niagara and its
Yeah.
tender fruit.
Yeah, so we'll be doing that, and again, we'll have our annual Great Fits garage sale that's
Yeah.
happening this year. We're kind of putting a new twist on it, which we're excited about. We're putting a kind of a maker's market kind of idea. So if you are an artisan that you make cool things, do you know the Instagram account on that?
I think it's the Great Fits.
Is it just
garage
Great
sale or
Fits?
Yeah, that
something
could
like
be
that.
it. Yeah.
So yeah,
just
find
kinda
it
started up.
find
Is
it
that
online.
spring or summer? Is that?
So that's happening in the summer, in
Summer.
June, I believe it is.
June 6th.
June 6th. Previous to that, we'll
Easter
be
egg
having
hunt.
the Easter egg hunt. So this will be our 4th year doing our Easter egg hunt at Catherine Street Park. And that's how things all got started back in 2017.
Very cool.
So that was very cool. So yeah, we're excited to have that happening. So yeah,
Yeah,
lots
there's
of
the
things
running
happening in
crew.
the Fits.
There's Fitz Rocks. So
Yeah, the running cruise every Tuesday night, right?
Yeah.
Tuesday night.
Yep.
Cool. There's a lot going on, and if people want to know more about what's going on, what's the socials and the website that they can
Yeah,
get?
so FitzgeraldNeighbours.com.
Mm-hmm.
Com? CA?
If you just Google it, it'll come
Just
up too.
Google it.
we don't update the
And
website. Oh, I don't. Do we update the website a lot?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
It looks pretty up to date. There may be a couple things you can throw in there, but
And we know what? And again, shout out to Jesse. And we have a new kind of crew,
Yeah, doing.
collective, that's going to be doing a lot more communications. Derek, you're one of those key
yes,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
need
yeah.
to jump back
volunteers.
in the conversation because
Absolutely.
I've had a crazy couple months,
Yeah.
and I'll jump back on and see at what capacity I can.
So we're
Yeah,
excited
get
because we're
involved.
going to be sending out newsletters. We're going to start sending out a quarterly newsletter. So look out for that. More blog posts and kind of opportunities for you to engage online.
Mm-hmm.
Find us on Instagram, Facebook, Fitzgerald Neighbours is our handle. And we're really... if you want to find out about us, our Instagram and Facebook is kind of the place to go.
Today's
Yeah, and then
spot.
come out to
Yeah.
meetings. So we meet the first
Yeah.
Thursday of every month at Maestro's Pizzeria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Maestro's first Thursday, 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And it's just it's an opportunity for everyone to kind of...
Yeah, we got a decent amount of business done, but we're always open to new people coming out and chatting, and
Yeah.
we try to make as much space as we can just to have those informal conversations where, yeah, we welcome new neighbors and we tell them what we're about, and we just kind of tell them, like whatever skills you bring to the table, we want to
Yeah.
engage them, and you're a
sure.
DJ and you played it at our AGM.
For sure, man.
Absolutely. And the last thing I will mention is that we're also engaging around bullying and
Right.
making our neighborhood as
yeah.
inclusive as possible.
So that bullies can be included as well.
Yeah.
Bullies can be included
Right.
as well. So Caleb is actually working with the DSBN
One of the DSBN school trustees.
to do kind of a bullying workshop,
Cool.
a parenting workshop.
Yeah, it's kind of the idea is it's very early days, but the idea is to have a workshop for parents how to parent. I don't know how to say it. How to parent Not bullies.
A kid that's getting bullied.
No, the other way around. Just like how to parent so your child is less likely to become a bully.
For sure,
right?
sure,
And
yeah.
understand the issues around bullying and, like
How to recognize it, how it starts.
how to recognize how it starts and just its strategies to help your child who is a bully. And I suppose like the other way around too. Strategies on how to help a child who is being bullied.
Yeah.
No more victims. I think that's the key.
And so we're doing that as well as working to get a rainbow crosswalk around Harriet Tubman. So I'm meeting with the LGBTQ+2 committee on December 8th, I think. So we're going to be talking about how we can get that.
Yeah, I'm not
benefits.
opposed to
So-
painting it too without any permission. Just going out and painting the street.
Yeah,
Erase it
we're
after.
going to see what
Sure.
they say. They are quoting me at $6,000 to get a crosswalk, so you might be able to do it for cheaper. We'll
Oh yeah,
see.
I can do it for cheaper for sure.
So
Some paint over there.
yeah, we got some paint somewhere. So anyway, so we're engaging in that conversation as well, and
Cool.
how to make our neighborhood inclusive, victim free. Is that what?
No more victims.
No more
It's
victims.
basically going to be a utopia.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
cheap housing.
Cheap
no
housing,
bullying.
yeah.
Very diverse.
Probably about
walkable.
5 years. It'll be 5-year plan.
Absolutely, we can do that.
Well, guys, I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast. It was very informative, and we'll see you guys. We'll see you guys next time. Fitzgerald Neighbours. Google it.
Thanks.
Yeah,